An individual Chaos Space Marine is a living nightmare, a vessel of corruption and hatred twisted by the Dark Gods into something beyond human comprehension. In battle, they are merciless and unrelenting, slaughtering with a cold, fanatical devotion to their dark patron. All the while, their minds are lost to the promise of power and damnation. Each one is a blasphemy of nature, a walking abomination that revels in the suffering of others. And in today's deep dive, we're going to explore some of these sadistic and terrifying Chaos Space Marines, starting with Brother Nylan. Brother Nylan was a young Space Marine librarian of the Valiant Salamanders chapter. He studied under the famed chief librarian Velcona, and at first it seemed like this young battle brother would thrive within the chapter. Nylan was unique amongst his fellow neophytes as his psychic powers grew rather quickly, and with this increase in abilities came the temptations of power. He continued to progress in his physical and mental training. However, Nylan was continually caught delving into forbidden knowledge of the warp in order to strengthen his own psychic abilities. Velcona tried the best to correct the young librarian on various occasions, but his thirst for power was clearly leading him down the wrong path. With great sorrow, the chief librarian made the decision to end Nylan's life, fearing that his heretical tendencies would endanger the first founding chapter. Nylan was shackled with a null collar, preventing the librarian from utilizing his psychic powers ever again, and then was left for dead inside the ruins of the world of Lycanor. Infuriated by this betrayal, enacted by the same battle brother that was supposed to be his mentor, Nylan allowed himself to fully accept the powers of chaos and turned from the light of the Emperor of Mankind. He repudiated his oath to both his lineage and his chapter, becoming a servant to the Chaos Gods. Nylan's life wouldn't end on Lycanor. Through the grace of his new Chaos Masters, Nylan escaped the planet and soon joined the demagogue Kh&acirc, the insane former chaplain of the Black Dragon's chapter who had also turned renegade. It is unknown what promise Kh&acirc made to Nylan or what bargain was struck, but the renegade salamander librarian swore fealty to the former Black Dragon's cause and eagerly followed his new master. Eventually, a strike force composed of the Salamander's Third Company, under the command of Captain Kh&acirc, caught up to the deranged chaplain and his renegades on the cemetery world of Morabar. While Kh&acirc delved into the secret crypts beneath the Sepulchre world, the Salamanders and the renegade followers of Kh&acirc fought savagely through the crematoriums of the ash-blanketed world. At the height of the fighting, Kh&acirc was plunged into the central furnace at the heart of the planet, and Librarian Nylan tried to save the former chaplain, but failed and was horribly burned in the process, barely surviving his horrific wounds. From the tattered remnants of Kh&acirc's followers, the newly christened Chaos Sorcerer Nylan formed the Dragon Warrior Chaos Space Marine Warband. Determined to enact vengeance against the Salamanders and the people of Nocturne, Captain Kh&acirc sealed his fate as the vengeful Nylan proceeded to engineer the heroic Salamander's downfall as revenge for his own horrific wounds. Nylan would forever carry large amounts of scarring on his onyx-colored skin from the incident. To cover it up, he wore power armor the color of split crimson blood, with long curving horns that arced from each shoulder plate. The armor appeared as if adorned with dragon scales, and possessed unholy talismans and the sigil of chaos, dangling from chains blackened from fire. The Dragon Warriors under Nylan's control were composed of mercenaries, renegade space marines, and various Xenos. He also possessed a chaos cruiser called the Hellstalker, that served as his mobile base of operation and the flagship of his motley fleet. The Hellstalker possessed an enormous seismic cannon, and he also had in his possession an ancient Stormbird dropship that he used to descend to the surface of a planet. It was this military force that Nylan used to orchestrate the Chaos Cult uprising of the Cult of Truth on the mining world of Stratos. The revolt was simply a distraction, while the Chaos Sorcerer secretly recovered the artifact known as the Deciphex from the depths of the planet's floating city. The Salamanders responded to Stratos' astropathic distress call, and Nylan was prepared for such a counterattack. In an act of strategic superiority, the Chaos Sorcerer sprung his trap to kill Captain Kh&acirc, finally getting revenge against the warrior that gave Nylan his scars. After the successful murder of Kh&acirc, Nylan enlisted a warband of iron warriors to mine for a special ore known as Phyron from the world of Scoria. It was during this time that the Chaos Sorcerer entered into a demonic pact with the demon Engelsack in order to enhance his already formidable psychic powers. The demon told Nylan of a forbidden tome that possessed the fell knowledge of the ancient Nocturnian corpse masters that had the ability to resurrect the dead. With this formidable knowledge, Nylan hoped to resurrect his former master. In return for the demon's knowledge and the enhancement of powers, the Chaos Sorcerer provided the demon a host body, enabling him to enter the material realm as a demon host and wreak havoc on the Salamander's chapter. It was during this conflict that Nylan revealed his nefarious plan. Utilizing a seismic cannon, he created a shaft that delved deep into the Mount Deathfire, the sacred mountain of the Salamanders on Nocturne. Within the mountain, the Chaos Sorcerer was able to breach the hidden sacred shrine that contained one of the lost books of the Primarch Vulcan, known as the Tome of Fire. The Chaos Sorcerer was confronted by the Salamander Epistolary Pyrel, his fellow former neophyte in training. He defeated him in a psychic battle that resulted in the Salamander's death. Pyrel's sacrifice was not in vain, as Chief Librarian Velcona arrived to face his former pupil before he could make good of his escape. The Chief Librarian and the Chaos Sorcerer battled within Mount Deathfire, but unfortunately for the Salamanders, Nylan was able to escape thanks to the timely intervention of his personal bodyguards, known as the Glaive. With the Chaos Sorcerer gone, his intentions are still to resurrect his former master, and Nylan's current whereabouts are completely unknown to the Salamanders. Now let's move on to Khorne as we talk about Crannon the Relentless. Before he was Crannon the Relentless, the Chaos Lord was a loyalist Astartes named Sevastus Crannon. Crannon's superb military mind elevated him to the position of chapter master of the Crimson Saber Space Marine chapter. Under his command, the chapter won great accolades, crushing whole worlds in the name of the Emperor. However, his brutal manner earned the Crimson Sabers a dark reputation in the bordered Imperium. His savagery would lead to the eventual excommunication of the Crimson Sabers, and it all began on the jungle world of Umedia, where the chapter conducted a genocide purge of the Balthu cults. Subsequent interrogation of the captured Crimson Sabers revealed that the Chaos cult of the planet were in the process of summoning a demon of Khorne, and in their rush of judgment, the Crimson Sabers purged the entire planet of life, men, women, and children. As an act of revenge or possibly reward for the bloody annihilation of his followers, Khorne cursed the Crimson Sabers to be haunted by the voices of all those that they had just slain. The entire chapter was literally haunted by the butchery of their action. Poltergeist activity surrounded the Crimson Sabers wherever they went, and it became known as the mysterious Balthu. Whenever a Space Marine closed his eyes, he would see the faces of those he had killed, and hear their screams in his mind. Sleep became impossible, and slowly at first, a pall of paranoid insanity spread throughout the chapter like a disease. This led the Crimson Sabers to being declared renegades by the Inquisition and the High Lords of Terra, due to the signs of continued psychological instability that the Astartes of the chapter displayed, and to add to that, their continued overzealous persecutions of their campaigns. In an attempt to burn away the harrowing memories and the fires of war, Chapter Master Crannon declared the neighboring world of Demetra tainted by the proximity of Umedia, and the killing began anew. The desperate plan worked, for the specters of Balthu were drowned out by the series of gore-drenched battles. Subsequent bloodshed could silence the voices, but only for a short time. Crannon then led his warriors into the Eye of Terror to slaughter traitors instead of spilling the blood of Imperial innocents, thereby gaining a temporary respite. Self-exiled into the Eye of Terror, the Crimson Sabers were blessed with many gifts by the ruinous powers to further their combat prowess. They were finally fully corrupted by chaos and remade themselves as the warband of the Chaos Space Marines called the Crimson Slaughter. Sevastus Crannon was reborn as the Chaos Lord and Champion of Khorne named Crannon the Relentless. Here he learned of the mysterious chaotic artifact known as the Hellfire Stone, an altar dedicated to Khorne that could forever free his Astartes from the curse and silence the voices in their head once and for all. It was said that once this artifact was anointed with the blood of a space marine, the Hellfire Stone would open a doorway into the warp and allow a powerful demon to pass through into real space. Joining forces with warbands drawn from the traitor legions during the 13th Black Crusade, Crannon and the Crimson Slaughter began their rampage across multiple Imperial worlds in a relentless search for the Hellfire Stone. Carving a bloody swath across a dozen or more populated worlds that dotted the southern rim of the galaxy, the Crimson Slaughter overwhelmed Imperial garrisons and slaughtered whole populations before vanishing back into the warp. Although their rebellion against the Imperium had been well documented, if subsequently suppressed by the order of the Inquisition, the remote nature of the planets they attacked meant that by the time the distress call was answered, the Crimson Slaughter had long departed. This remained true until the Crimson Slaughter made the mistake of engaging the Dark Angel's 5th Company in a battle upon the world of Stern's remembrance, slaying many battle brothers, including the 5th Company's master. Such an act of violence earned the undying wrath of the Dark Angels and the newly ascended 5th Company master, Balthazar, who swore to hunt down those responsible for his predecessor's death and bring their heads back to the Rock, the spaceborne fortress monastery of the Dark Angels. The 5th Company was also accompanied in their task by members of the Dark Angels' elite 1st Company, the Death Wing, members of the 2nd Company, the Raven Wing, and a powerful librarian named Termail, who had been trained by Ezekiel, the chief librarians of the Dark Angels. Eventually, Crannon the Relentless finally found the Hellfire Stone on the world of Bane's Landing. Unfortunately, he was confronted by the Dark Angels' 5th Company. Crannon intended to use the Hellfire Stone to summon forth his demonic masters and usher in a new age of darkness. During the battle that followed, he claimed the lives of several Dark Angels and took the Raven Wing Sergeant Arion prisoner for use in rituals. However, Arion's suicide thwarted his plan and he was forced to retreat. Luckily, Balthazar did manage to corner Crannon, and a great battle was fought between the two, but the Chaos Lord was able to teleport away. The Hellfire Stone disappeared from the planet and would not reappear for another 40 years. Following this battle, Crannon would suspect that he and his chapter were being used by an unknown power. This power turned out to be one of Tzeentch's Lord of Change, who had been possessing the body of the former Chief Librarian Manon. Crannon would pursue Manon deep into the Eye of Terror to a world called Maimadrax. There he would cut the demon's arm off before it retreated yet again. Still being pursued by the Dark Angels, Librarian Termail would predict that over the course of the next 3 years, Crannon would join forces with much more powerful Chaos Lords and would be cornered on a moon in Tau space. The vision predicted that a combined effort of the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves would lead to a 3rd battle between Balthazar and Crannon. Crannon would eventually meet his end and his head would be decapitated, taken back to the battle barge Angel of Retribution by Balthazar in an iron box. And yet it is unknown if this vision is true. The last we knew of Crannon was during the Daimor campaign and during the attack on Cadia during the 13th Black Crusade. And with that said, let's move on to a Tzeentchian Chaos Space Marine, a sorcerer by the name of Oberon the Undying. The Chaos Sorcerer Oberon the Undying was a former Imperial Fist battle brother who fell to the temptations of chaos sometime during the early 36th millennium. His betrayal is a close-guarded secret by the Stoic First Founding Chapter, and at this point, only the spoken accounts from the few Imperial Fist dreadnoughts with first-hand accounts of his betrayal exist. These ancients tell the tragedy of the proud and powerful Oberon, whose prodigious power as a psyker drove him to mistrust his commanders and grow in his arrogance. Oberon excelled in the discipline of divination. His sight into the hidden web of fate that manipulated events yet to come allowed him to predict the paths of bullets and swords, making him almost impossible to strike down. These same powers allowed him to predict the enemy's action before they themselves knew what they were going to do. Like a master swordman that can read the swing of a sword by the body language of a foe, Oberon could see the actions of an entire military force before the commander gave out his orders. Cheered on by his brothers who admired his incredible skills in close combat and his godlike intuition, Oberon pushed for more and more control of the battlefield. Directing the battle brothers of his company at the opportune moment to catch the enemy at its weakest point, Oberon achieved victory after victory. Unfortunately, it came with a terrible price, as the company captains and lieutenants were sidelined by the great librarian. Although they all had twice Oberon's experience, he treated these veterans with the same amount of respect as any other member of the company, and tensions quickly began to develop. Oberon didn't give counsel when his commanders asked. His warp-empowered insight was given as an order. In the mind of Oberon, victory was not good enough. Complete battlefield supremacy was the greatness that every Astartes should strive for, and anyone settling for mediocre success was not fit to fight alongside him. The veteran warriors of his company tried warning Oberon of the dangers of relying too much on his powers. They tried making him understand the true value of a low-cost victory, but in his mind, measured actions were for lesser beings. It was during the pacification of the warp-tainted planet of Runshot that Oberon's diviner powers finally failed him. The librarian received a vision of a future where he marched at the head of the Imperial Fist and their successors during what he felt was the end times. In an instant, he was transported backwards through the web of fate as dozens of prophetic scenes played out, each one a stepping stone from that one first glorious vision, and it was the last prophetic vision which told him what to do next. Ignoring his captain's orders to hold for company reinforcements, Oberon sent his force into what he believed was a crippling spearhead assault, but instead, it was a perfectly orchestrated ambush by the traitor Planetary Defense Force. 25 Sons of Dorn, along with multiple engines of war, fell to the bombardment of the heretical humans. The shame he brought to the chapter could not go unpunished, but instead of accepting his failure, Oberon blamed the terrible loss on his battle brothers, claiming that it was their hesitation in his direction that caused their death, not his interpretation of fate. Before his punishment could be assigned, however, Oberon received another vision of a similar but not identical future from before. It was destined that he would lead the Sons of Dorn into their final battle, but in order to accomplish this, Oberon had to travel into the maelstrom of chaos. Never doubting his own powers, Oberon managed to evade capture and set course for the Eye of Terror. When his ship finally entered the stellar maelstrom, Oberon stood at the bridge of his vessel staring into the hellish void he was trained to fear. But amidst the chaos, his soul felt calm. Phantom images ghosted in and out of his perception. Demons attempted to coerce him into turning off his Geller field, but Oberon simply waited. And then suddenly, in a flash of pale blue light, the physical manifestation of fate itself appeared to Oberon. Taking the form of crackling blue energy that manifested as a shifting human face, it uttered the truth of the end times and what possible outcome may come from the apocalyptic battle. At that moment, Oberon knew without a doubt what role he must play in the long war. Accepting the bargain laid out before him, the once proud Imperial Fist librarian gave himself over to chaos, and the etheric force entered his body, mutating everything inside. And finally we have the Chaos Space Marine Mahor the Harvester. Before Mahor fell to the service of the Blood God Khorne, he was the captain of the 3rd Company of the Shadowhawks Loyalist Space Marine Chapter, and in the 39th millennium, after a 12-year campaign to eradicate the rebellious factions within the population of the hive world of Kh&acirc, the 3rd Company of the Shadowhawks were censured for their widespread culling of the population that marked the end of the campaign, but left the world unable to fulfill the production quota owed to the Administratum. Rather than accept the dishonor of exile on a penitent crusade, Captain Mahor led the survivors of the 3rd Company in a series of raids on Imperial fleets and outposts in the Kh&acirc system, before vanishing into the lightless void of the Halo Stars. The Halo Stars was the name given to the ancient formation of stars that encircled the outer edge of the Milky Way galaxy. It represented the last stellar cluster to be encountered before one enters the eternal frigid night of the intergalactic void. This region of space has a malignant reputation amongst the Imperial starfarers, and it is believed by many, including quite a few rogue traders and Adeptus Mechanicus explorators, that those foolish enough to venture out into those mysterious reaches never return. And their beliefs have some credibility, as pirates, warp entities, and new species of hostile Xenos often dwell in the frontier's darkness. In this void, Mahor was able to allow his hatred of the Imperium to fester. It was unfathomable how Astarte warriors could allow themselves to be ruled over by the High Lords of Terra, such a weak and pathetic organization that has no true grasp of how much worthier a Space Marine is to rule over the galaxy. While man hides and fears the depths of the Halo Stars, Mahor and his battle brothers thrive, just further proof of the Astarte superiority. Surprisingly, the former Loyalist captain found several renegade warbands already existing in this region of space. They finally introduced Mahor to a being worthy of his following, entity so powerful his wrath has no complacency, Khorne, the god of war. Inspired by the other warband's rebellious nature and driven by his thirst for revenge against the weak Imperium, Mahor convinced these traitors to follow him on a path of retribution against those unfit to rule. There Mahor finally succumbed to the temptations of the blood god Khorne, and he became leader of the Slaughterkin warband. The Imperium wouldn't take notice of Mahor again until the late 41st millennium, when the Adeptus Administratum tithe fleets arrived on the 3 worlds of the Hreidmaw cluster, seeking the tally of lives and produce due to the Emperor as part of the Imperial tithes. They found that each world was a wasteland. The headless corpses of each of the world's inhabitants lay abandoned, not slain in battle, but carefully harvested and their skulls piled in great towering obelisks. While attempting to demolish these foul monuments, the Slaughterkin warband came down on the Imperial forces, who were led by Mahor, and soon the skulls of the Administratum factions and the Astra Militarum regiments assigned to their protection were offered in sacrifice to Khorne atop the rebuilt obelisks. After this devastation, Mahor became known as the Harvester, and he sought to assault the agri-world of Kh&acirc in the Ultima Segmentum. He laid the seeds of rebellion by establishing a series of chaos cults. They were the so-called cardinal cults from among the world's population of primitive agricultural workers, who spent their lives harvesting the roots of the world's nutrient-rich trees. Their yield was processed into substance to support the Astra Militarum regiments engaged in the Carthage Crusade. The cult spread rapidly throughout the population and unleashed a massive rebellion against the imperial rule. It wasn't long before the world fell to complete anarchy and war. The ensuing conflict with the local planetary defense force and the Astra Militarum regiments was fought beneath the dense canopy of the swamp-like forests, and in the air between the Imperial Navy pilots and the Hell Talons and Hellblades brought to the world by the Slaughterkin's arrival after the rebellion had severely weakened the Imperial defenders. The Imperial cause was further damaged when the corruption of chaos took many of the planetary defense force units as they turned to the worship of the ruinous powers. Once the Harvester took the planetary capital, the victory of the forces of chaos seemed assured. Deliverance only came when the 5th Battle Company of the Star Phantoms chapter of the Adeptus Astartes, under the command of Captain Calfax, arrived in system for resupply, and they launched an immediate and devastating attack upon the rebel stronghold, slaying the Harvester and driving the remaining traitor marines of the Slaughterkin back into the Halo stars. Now let's move on to Erebus of the Wordbearers. Born on the barren planet of Kh&acirc, his envy of others pushed him to commit his first heinous act. The boy that would become Erebus murdered and stole the identity of the true Erebus, a highly respected and admired schoolmate that was a devout worshipper of the old gods of Kh&acirc. But murdering and disposing of the body of this beloved individual wasn't enough. The evil Erebus actually took it a step further by marking his face and body with the same henna-like markings that made the true Erebus so recognizable. By masquerading as the pious youngling, the evil Erebus took on the prestige of his murdered victim. Not only was Erebus's identity false, but his worship of the old gods, which were in fact the Chaos gods, was at a time just a sham. This and many other terrible actions were spurred on by a bitterness and discontent that Erebus would never escape, even when he fought alongside the Primarch Lorgar and was allowed to become a Chaos Space Marine, despite his old age. Erebus also held resentment for his Primarch, for he was seen as the chosen one, even after he began worshipping the Chaos gods. Erebus would spread the seed of his evil by instigating Lorgar's worship of the Emperor of Mankind, and when the Emperor punished Lorgar for his actions, it was Erebus that reintroduced the Chaos gods into the mind of his Primarch. By this point, Erebus became the instrument of the ruinous powers, and his evil plots became instrumental in the corruption of Horus Lupercal. Without Erebus supplying the anathema blade to the planetary governor of Davin, and convincing the Lunawolves to treat their Primarch in the Serpent Lodge, the entire Horus heresy would have never come to fruition. It can even be argued that the corroding state of the Imperium and the downfall of the Emperor was not orchestrated by the Primarchs or even the Chaos Gods, but a simple Chaos Space Marine, Erebus himself. To this day, the Dark Apostle continues to spread his evil throughout the galaxy. During the 13th Black Crusade, Erebus led an army of wordbearers across the Kh&acirc sector, sacrificing millions of human captives to summon a vast army of demons to assault the Imperial forces across the sector. His depravity found at the core of his soul, his corruption of those around him, and his continued assault on the Imperium of Man showcases how Erebus is one of, if not the worst, Chaos Space Marine in Imperial history. Another contender for the title of worst Chaos Space Marine is Kh&acirc the Betrayer. A Terran-born space marine, Kh&acirc fought under the banner of the Warhounds until the Legion was given over to the Primarch Angron, and it became the World Eater's Legion. Kh&acirc's story can actually be seen as a terrible tragedy. This proud warrior of the ancient Germanic tribes of Old Earth was an incredible fighter, but was forced to undergo the implantations of the Butcher's Nails, along with the rest of Angron's sons. This archaic augmentation, and the eventual corruption of the god of blood Khorne, drove the World Eaters mad. And when given the opportunity to receive salvation from the constant madness that plagued Khorne by the Thousand Sons captain Calliston, Khorne butchered the sorcerer that promised him aid. But this terrible act isn't what elevated Khorne to the position of worst Chaos Space Marine. The atrocity he is most known for is the slaughtering of not only a large force of Emperor's children, but his own warband of Khornate berserkers. This horrible act of bloodshed and betrayal, known as the Battle of Scalathrax, echoes in the domain of the Chaos God Khorne. Legions of bloodthirsty demons agonize in envy, while the Chaos Space Marine warbands are horrified when they hear about the savagery of Kh&acirc the Betrayer. His demented actions have fueled not only the bloodlust of the demon hordes of his master, but his pursuit of the Blood God's eightfold path inspired the worshippers of Khorne into extreme acts of wickedness, as his followers eagerly killed those that are the weakest, friend and foe alike. Only the most desperate or insane warrior fights alongside Khorne. When not leaving trails of bloody gore throughout the galaxy, Khorne has been seen working alongside Abaddon the Despoiler, collecting human heads with every swing of his demonic weapon, Gorechild. If you want to listen to more details on the Battle of Scalathrax or Karn's madness, check out the videos linked in the description below. We've actually already created some. It is Karn's betrayal, the imitation that he inspires, and his continual butchering that makes him one of the worst Chaos Space Marines in the galaxy. Now let's move on to the Night Lord Zhao Saha. When the Horus Heresy began, first captain of the Night Lords, Zhao Saha, also known as the Talon Master, pled complete loyalty to his Primarch Kh&acirc rather than the Emperor of Mankind. Like so many of his Night Lord brethren, Saha believed devoutly in the War Master Horus's rationale that the Emperor of Mankind had betrayed Curse and the Night Lords by retreating from the Great Crusade to Terra to seek his own divinity and leave civilian bureaucrats in control of the Imperium rather than one of the Primarchs who had won the galaxy for him. Before the Night Haunter's death, Saha was designated by the Primarch as his heir. Knowing that he would die at the hands of a Kh&acirc assassin, Kh&acirc chose Captain Saha as the next in line to wear the crown of knight, or the Corona Nox. This was a sacred artifact that the Primarch wore first as a sign of his rule over his homeworld of Nostromo, and then as a symbol of office for the rightful successor as the ruler of the Night Lord's Legion after Kh&acirc's prophesied death. The artifact was a literal crown that was forged from the adamantium recovered from the planetary crust where his gestation capsule had crash-landed when the Primarchs were first scattered by the forces of chaos. The crown had a number of rubies known as bloodstones and a single diamond embedded within its surface that contrasted with its obsidian frame. Inheriting the Corona Nox would prove to the Night Lord's Legion that Saha is the undisputed successor, but before the Corona could be passed on, it was stolen by the assassin Mishan after the death of Kh&acirc, and this is when Saha's obsession with this sacred artifact began. Enraged with vengeance and ignoring the warnings of his Primarch, Saha relentlessly pursued the Kh&acirc assassin, only to be ensnared by the schemes of the Eldari, which ambushed his starship in an attempt to take the dead Primarch's crown for themselves. During the altercation, Saha was trapped in a warp storm. Luckily, he wasn't killed. Instead, 10 millennia passed in real space while Saha was trapped in the Immaterium. When he awoke, he discovered that his starship had emerged from the warp and crashed on the hive world of Erebus, transporting him from the early 31st millennium to the late 41st millennium. To make matters worse, the Corona Nox was once again missing from his possession. Saha began his quest for the Corona once more, and began by killing the Erebus hive gangers who had stolen his precious item from his downed vessel while he was still in hibernation. Surprisingly, he discovered a kindred spirit amidst one of the gangs in the lower portions of the Hive cities, as these gangers reminded him of the people who had inhabited the Night Haunter's homeworld of Nostromo, his very own homeworld. This luck was short-lived, however, as members of the Inquisition's Ordo Hereticus, led by Inquisitor Costas, were investigating the planet for heresy. Saha's quest for the Corona Nox was further complicated by the presence of a psyker named Mida Ashin, a young interrogator within the Inquisitor's retinue of acolytes who could sense his presence and his objective, and so Saha led the Hive gang to war throughout the Hive City. Saha continued to attempt to regain the Corona, and eventually signaled his fellow legionnaires amongst the Night Lords, now inhabiting a demon world within the Eye of Terror, to come to the planet and aid him in his quest. He was, however, deeply disappointed when these Night Lords arrived on Saha, learning that in his absence, the Legion had forgotten Kh&acirc's teachings, and instead had devolved after 10,000 Terran years under the constant influence of chaos, and they were little more than superpowered fear-craving psychopaths. The Night Lords were now led by the embodiment of corruption in Saha's eyes, a demon prince of chaos undivided, named Kh&acirc, known during the heresy as the Axemaster, who had once been Saha's greatest rival within the Legion. Saha would go on to confront the demon prince that claimed control of what remained of the Night Lords. As Saha laid eyes on his former rival, he realized that there was no hope for reclaiming his master's legacy, no hope for inflicting order and control upon a creature so utterly lost to chaos. The demon prince that once was Kh&acirc paused, shadow shifting despite its stillness, as its eyes that once were human glared down upon Saha and narrowed.
"You're smaller than I remember,"
it said amused. Its voice was a thing of mingled screams and echoes of tortured souls, harmonizing and direct. It bypassed sound and arrived fully formed like a migrant in the center of Saha's brain. He fought the urge to vomit. The creature radiated despair as a fire emits heat, and he felt it coil through his senses, churning his confidence to paste, reducing every triumph he had ever enjoyed to failure. The creature was Kh&acirc beyond doubt. He was changed, almost beyond belief. He had grown massive, Where once there had been armor, now there was iron flesh, living warp stuff that withered and tightened, swarming with wicked runes. He was no longer a thing of corporality, that much was clear. In every dimension he ghosted and hardened, then faded to smoke, as if uncomfortable with solidity, burning with immaterial energies that flared not with light, but with dark, smoldering emissions poured from his long limbs like steams from a smithy, tentacles of shadows bulging from his spine, and then when he moved, it was as if the existence of light itself was forgotten. It was as if perpetual night had arisen, and morning would never arrive. At the tips of arms so long they plucked at the floor, claws glittered and spat sparks, forged not from flesh nor metal, but from the raw stuff of darkness itself. "Where is my legion?" Saha said, pushing down the stifling failure, denying it for a sweet second longer, bolstering himself with foundationless courage. The beast crooked its pale face, sneering through lipless jaws, and aimed a smoking talon at the rent in the wall. Saha approached the torn metal like a cripple, limping from more wounds than he could count, wincing at every movement. The skies of the planet were on fire. An orbital bombardment had been the first step. Great glittering teardrops of incendiary flares beyond the clouds, hurtling down at impossible speeds to inflict ruinous tears across the city's surface. Those few defenses untouched by the Shadowkin attacks were picked clear one by one, gouged from the surface like tumors, and with each impact, shredded metal churned out and out. The hive wobbled as if shaken to its core, and thousands upon thousands died. The raptors followed the bombardment, and in the face of a dizzying descent, Saha's hope was crushed further. These were not the agile warriors whose kind he had created. These were not the assault squads he had formed and trained eons ago, spreading among the other legions as their successes became legend. These were not the raptors he knew. They came like demon vultures, chainswords snarling, pistols flaring in the snow-choked sky. They crackled and shrieked, and their twisted arms shimmered with unholy light, like an ember's dying glow. They were a plague, Saha thought. As they vanished one by one inside the wounds of the hive's surface, he slipped to his knees, his mind rebelling against its own witness. And then the warriors themselves, a rain of drop pods and assault crafts that vomited from a heaving storm cloud, smashing against the city shells like hammers pounding anvils. In lightning flash tableaus and the stolen flares of detonating munitions, Saha could glimpse the ranks of his so-called brothers as they fell upon the crowds within. Blue and bronze whirlwinds, without grace or poise, frenzied, out of control, utterly chaotic. The Night Lords descended upon the planet like a bloody rain, and the screams of the population drowned out even the howlings of the perpetual ice storm. "Oh, my master, what have they done? What have they become?" The failure was a firebrand slipping into his eyes. It was a tidal wave, a bow blast of supernova, roiling and boiling to devour him whole. It settled on his shoulders like the weight of a galaxy itself, and he felt every bone in his body splinter to dust, every blood vessel burst, every atom of every part of him split and die. He was too late. He wondered if he'd already known, deep within inside himself. Perhaps he had always known. Since awakening in the ruptured belly of his ship, too long had passed, too many centuries had glided by, devoid of influence and leadership. His master had chosen him as his heir to bring focus to a legion in peril, to unite a body that threatened to tear itself apart, to offer more measures of temperance against the whispering seduction of power and rage. He had been selected as the legion's deliverance from corruption, and he had not been present to fulfill his vows. 100 centuries, unguided, unprotected, was more than long enough to succumb. The demon lord Erebus hissed behind him, delighted by the carnage enacted below. Howls rose like smoke, the shrieks of dying men, the moans of tortured women, and the tears of youth. "This without purpose," Saha whispered, gazing down into the flares. "Where's the sense in this? Have you no worthier targets than women and children?"
Every target is worthy.
The demon said, waves of despair carrying in his voice.
And the purpose, little Talon Master, do you remember our master's lesson? The purpose is fear. It is always fear.
Saha turned to face the abomination, tears in his eyes, and above him it drew sinuous claws across its corporeal chest, eyes closed, face unturned, as if savoring a fine scent.
Do you taste it?
It whispered.
Do you taste the terror of the world? Is it intoxicating?
Saha felt disgust engulfed him. "You dare lecture me on Night Haunter's lessons," he snarled, anger gripping him, breaking through the shame and failure like a hatching beast. "You dare. when you've fallen so far from wisdom. Fear is the weapon, fool, not the goal. The devil crooned, maw sprawling in delight.
All righteous little Saha, how I have missed you. Look at what you've become. You've spat in the face of his legacy. Have you no shame? Our master's legacy lives little, Saha.
The beast brandished a fist, clenching claws together.
Through me, it prospers.
Saha would go on to attack the demon prince and defeat most of his foes, reclaiming the Corona Nox, though at the price of severely wounding his arm. Saha eventually returned to the Eye of Terror to press his claim to rule over the Night Lord's Legion, but this attempt did not prove successful, as many of the members of the Night Lords now called Saha the Betrayer, because he fled from the First Company while they were still battling the Eldari, so that he could continue to hunt down the crown. A further discussion between Talos Soul Hunter of the 10th Company of the Night Lords and the War Master Abaddon later revealed that Saha's claim to leadership of the Night Lord's Legion had no more merit than any of the other supposed chosen successors of the Night Hunter, who displayed other stolen relics that belonged to their Primarch and claimed to be his heir. Now let's move on to Lucius. This deranged demigod was sadistic even before he transformed into a space marine. Born to a noble family in the mountains of northern Europa on Terra, as a child, Fabius Bile was taught the dark art of flesh crafting by one of the family servants. His preference for biographs and organic augmentations, as opposed to bionics, continued even when he became an apothecary of the Emperor's Children Legion, and when he earned the title of Lieutenant Commander, his experimentations on the superhuman bodies of the Space Marines continued. Fabius Bile used everything he learned from attempting to find a cure for the blight that plagued the Emperor's Children Legion, and placed it towards forbidden genetic manipulation during the Horus Heresy. It was Bile, under the command of Fulgrim, that created the first clone of a Primarch, the deceased Ferrus Manus, and would go on to commit the largest act of heresy by producing clones of every single Primarch, although only 3 ever made it to maturity. But it is the fact that Fabius Bile can create literal demigods through his experimentations that makes him such a dangerous Chaos Space Marine. He has created abominations like the New Men, the Vatborn, Thralls, and the Mindworms, all projects that have devastated humanity since Fabius Bile turned against the Imperium and his very own Primarch. Fabius Bile is also the key reason why most Chaos Space Marine warbands have the ability to extract corrupted gene seed and are able to produce new Chaos Space Marines. He sold everything he knew about this process to the traitor legions after the Great Scouring, but also ensured that he was at the center of every major genetic experimentation in the Eye of Terror. As a maniacal Chaos Lord, Bile has inspired hundreds of dark surgeons to tread the path of perfection and create warp-tainted monstrosities. It is safe to say that without Fabius Bile, Chaos Space Marine warbands would have a much harder time maintaining slaves and keeping their ranks filled with new corrupted demigods. To make matters worse, Bile is only getting smarter, as his knowledge of genetic manipulation expands after every single battle. He is close to reproducing a corrupted Adeptus Custodes, and is attempting to twist the gene seed organs of the Primaris Space Marine. This Chaos Space Marine has managed to corrupt the sacred process of creating Primarchs, has been instrumental in the growth of Chaos Space Marine warbands, and continues to experiment with the uncorruptible warriors of not just the Imperium, but every race in the galaxy. This is why Fabius Bile is one of the worst Chaos Space Marines in existence. And finally we get to the last most vile Chaos Space Marine, the Chaos Sorcerer, Kh&acirc. Born on Terra to wealthy tribes of old Earth, it was Kh&acirc and his brother, Ormuzd Ahriman, that joined the Great Crusade as part of the Thousand Sons Legion. The Legion quickly developed psychic powers at a much larger scale than the rest of the Space Marines, and with this sorcerer's power came a terrible affliction known as the Flesh Change, where a battle brother's body was mutated into a hideous beast resembling a Chaos Spawn. This genetic affliction was only cured when the Legion reunited with their Primarch, Magnus the Red, and using his powers, the Primarch was able to save some of the Legion from this flaw. Unfortunately, Ahriman's brother did not survive the Flesh Change. It would be this terrible warp-mutating flaw that would cause Ahriman to commit his most vile deed. When Magnus the Red made a deal with the Chaos God Tzeentch and transported the Primarch and his Legion into the Immaterium, the Flesh Change began to devastate the ranks of the Thousand Sons. Ahriman used the Book of Magnus to attempt to enact a spell similar to the one that saved the Legion before. Calling it the Rubric of Ahriman, it caused every warrior with no psychic abilities to become walking suits of mindless armor. While these battle brothers no longer suffered from the Flesh Change, they now were damned as Rubric Marines. This terrible act banished Ahriman from Magnus' side and led him to the full worship of the chaos god Tzeentch. He continued to scour the galaxy, raiding ancient museums, librariums, and places of learning to acquire as much sorcerous powers as he could, all the while murdering and spreading violence wherever he went. During the 13th Black Crusade, Ahriman was summoned back to Magnus' side and fought the Space Wolves during the siege of the Fenris system. It is Ahriman's original sin of damning his entire legion with the rubric of Ahriman and his continued pursuit of knowledge at the cost of his own battle brothers' lives that made Ahriman one of the worst Chaos Space Marines in existence. And that's our deep dive on terrifying Chaos Space Marines. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you have any suggestions for other topics, let me know what they are in the comment section below, and we'll talk tomorrow. This was Gershwin with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.